Good evening, everyone. We are continuing our wonderful journey with Jesus through his life. Last week we got him born, so now we're into all the wonderful things that come next. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Baba Ji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Open our hearts and minds to your presence, that everything we do will be a joyous expression of your presence within us. We aspire to live in your light, to be instruments of your light. Guide us and strengthen us, that our aspirations may be fulfilled. Om. Peace. Amen. All right, we're going to start this evening with a song, which is actually a chant, but we sing it also as a song, and it's called Through All Trials, because the first thing that happens right after Jesus is born is a great many difficulties assault both his people and himself. So that's where we're going to start right now.
Through all trials we sing thy name, joy in thee is life's sole aim. Through all trials we sing thy name, joy in thee is life's sole aim. Through all trials we sing thy name, joy in thee is life's sole aim. Through all trials we sing thy name, joy in thee is life's sole aim. Through all trials we sing thy name, joy in thee is life's sole aim. Through all trials we sing thy name, joy in thee is life's sole aim. Through all trials we sing thy name, joy in thee is life's sole aim. Through all trials we sing thy name, joy in thee is life's sole aim. Through all trials we sing thy name, joy in thee is life's sole aim. Through all trials we sing thy name, joy in thee is life's sole aim. Through all trials we sing thy name, joy in thee is life's sole aim. Through all trials we sing thy name, joy in thee is life's sole aim. Through all trials we sing thy name, joy in thee is life's sole aim.
Good evening. Now let's go to what happens. You may remember after Jesus was born, of course you remember, that the shepherds came, of course, to see him, and then the three wise men came. And as I was saying last week, Master said the three wise men came from India, and they were in fact three of our gurus. The way the Bible describes it, I'm going to repeat this: wise men visit Jesus. After they had heard the king, they went on their ways, and the star they had seen when it rose Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." And then after they had heard the king, the 3 wise men went on their way, and the star that they had seen when it rose went ahead of them, and until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So here you have, and it begins right away. And this is the story of Jesus, even at his birth, is still this, it's still duality. So we have Mary, who's utterly devoted to God, and her mother Anna, who's devoted, and Mary gets to go, even from a young age, gets to live in the temple, to have a spiritual upbringing, to serve in the temple, to spend her time in spiritual pursuits. Then the angel Gabriel comes upon her, tells her that she's going to bear this divine child. Her cousin Elizabeth is through Elizabeth's husband Zacharias. They have the miraculous coming of John the Baptist. All of that happens. It's all just glorious. Then just before the baby is to be born, though, Joseph has to get sent to Bethlehem. I was talking to a friend about government regulations for land use, COVID restrictions on what we're allowed to do, and tax laws and employment laws and all the different things, all the different ways in which the government makes our lives perhaps easier, but also more difficult. Then you go right back to the birth of Jesus, and right from the start, the government interfered and forced him to go someplace where Joseph and Mary had not planned to be. But then, of course, they find friends there, and when you read this story, and I'm going to be intermingling things that I've read from Edgar Cayce, also from various sources. None of this has to be true. It's not vitally important that it be true, because there are interesting lessons in it that we can draw in any case. Meaning, I stand behind. I believe what Cayce says, but I'm not. It's not like if Master said it. I just want to put it in context. But according to Cayce, the Essene community had people everywhere. And so even when Joseph got to Bethlehem, he had friends, and the friends of the Essene community who knew who they were. Because within the Essene community, everything about their lives was known. Again, I come back to the experience I have living within Ananda, where even though we're now dispersed all over the world, and I think with the lack of transportation and communication, even in a small area, communication wasn't that simple. Now it's easier, but we all just know everything that's going on in our family. And with the Essenes being as focused as they were on the coming of the Messiah, and them having been watching for these signs all this time, it would be impossible for them all not to know. So the way Cayce tells it, Joseph and Mary were much revered, and they weren't sent to Bethlehem by themselves. That other Essene friends went with them to help them, and then, of course, when they were established in the cave. But here we have this extraordinary spiritual being, and he is born in the most humble possible circumstances. And there's a lot of parallels with the life of Krishna, because Krishna's parents were royal, but the uncle, who was, I think, the older brother or of the king, the evil king who was in charge, had been told in a prophetic dream that the child of Vasudeva and Devaki would be his nemesis. So right after they were married, he threw them into prison And in their case, also he killed the babies because it was the 8th child that was supposed to be the one who was going to be his nemesis. So Krishna was born in a prison. You know, he was a king. He was literally a king. But he was born in a prison, and he was raised as a cowherd because it's self-evident that these spiritual teachers also have to show us that their power is not of this world, and that those of us who seek a spiritual reality need not be confused with worldly wealth and pleasure, because what we really want is the simple humility. But the kings do come and pay homage to Jesus, these great masters from India. And again, some of the explanations are that this was all a spiritual network of people who knew about each other. I mean, because there was a lot of traveling between these countries. There was a lot of trade. So people were always moving back and forth, and messages and news could be carried. So after the wise men realized that they should not go back and tell Herod, but nonetheless, when the wise man had departed, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for this child to kill him." So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." So this is, we don't always think about all these tiny parts of Jesus' life unless we're utterly dedicated to the Bible, and then we keep reading them and reading them. But you again also have to realize that even though God had promised that this child was going to be the Messiah and was going to deliver his people, the first things that happened to him at the beginning of his life don't look anything like what that destiny is supposed to be. So now Joseph and Mary, and again, there's also the part of the story here where Joseph is told in a dream that Herod is going to try to kill this child and you must take him away. So Joseph, whose only purpose in life, both of them, their only purpose in life is to protect this divine child that's been given to them, then they set out on the flight to Egypt. And there's a lot of beautiful art in regard to that. So I gathered up some pictures of Joseph and Mary on their way to Egypt with one of Swamiji's beautiful chants, so that we can really tune in to what we're tuning into is what it's really like to live a divine life. Because sometimes we have the idea either that it's, we just don't understand what God's will always looks like in our life. And we don't always understand what the blessings of God look like in our life. And in Swami's instructions for how to be a disciple, the first quality of a disciple is courage. So that's why some of these chants, what we're singing for this one, which is, "I have made thee pole star of my life." So we'll listen to Swamiji singing that chant, and we can project from the experience of Joseph and Mary everything in our lives that we've been asked to do, and the ability, no matter what God asks of us, to just keep our consciousness exactly where it should be. No matter what comes, I will follow the inner guidance that comes to me. So now let's enjoy that.
I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star stars are gone. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee full star of my life. I have made thee full star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. 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 I have made thee full star of my life. I have made thee full star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee full star of my life. I have made thee full star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy.
Listening to that, I was thinking, if you consider the true baby to be the potential for Christ consciousness within us, and you see in some of those pictures especially, just the attentive way that Joseph is watching over Mary. And of course, all Mary can do is hold the baby, but Joseph has to watch, and it's easy to project in a human way, just how he would move around to take care of his child. And of course, everything in this world is a symbol of the inner world. And so when that baby form of Christ consciousness begins within us, we have to consider our responsibility to it to be much more than just the way a human father feels for a human child. In other words, the only value to our lives, the deepest value to our lives would be more fair to say, is to always be attentive to that divine presence within. And we see it illustrated. Sometimes human expressions are so touching to us because they vividly show us what the divine is trying to teach us. Watching Joseph take Mary to Egypt made me just think about the tenderness of God's love for us and our responsibility to nurture that divine within us. So then, what happens is Herod hears, Herod realizes that the kings have outsmarted him, and they've been gone, but they never come back. So he, however, is not going to leave anything to chance. So he knows approximately when the child was born, and he knows that this child represents a great threat to his power. So he decides to solve the problem by having all the babies killed. Every child under the age of 2 is going to be killed. And this is generally called the slaughter of the innocents. And I mentioned it earlier when we were at the Church of the Visitation in Ein Karim, when the Virgin Mary was meeting with her cousin Elizabeth when both of them had the babes in the womb. And there was a painting there, and also this little rock grotto with a well in it, you may remember. And the story is, several stories, but one of them is that when the soldiers were coming to kill John, that the rock wall opened and they were able to go into the mountain, and the mountain closed in front of them, and they were protected until Herod's soldiers had passed. Other pictures say that an angel appeared and blinded the soldiers. There's even one tradition that says that Mary and Joseph took John with them to Egypt. There's another that says that Elizabeth and Zacharias released John into the wilderness. Now it depends on when the kings came and when all this happened, but he could have been as old as 2. Who knows exactly what really happened? But all of those stories tell you that in one way or another, John was also protected. But many, many, many innocent babies were killed. So this is how the Bible reads it. Herod orders the slaughter. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under. In accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. So, let us now, there is also art on the slaughter of the innocents, and I must say some of it is very intense. I tried to balance some of the more intense pictures with the pictures of all the babies being saved by Mary and Jesus. But it's also true that we have to understand that these things do happen. And these things do happen even to spiritual people. And it's always necessary for us, again, the word is, again, becomes courage, that we have to ask ourselves, when times are difficult, where do I turn? There's an experience that has happened in our community, in our temple, over the course of many years. People will be active and then they'll fade away. Maybe after a time they'll come back. I say, why? Where were you? And often they'll say to me, I was having such a hard time. I was going through this difficulty or that difficulty, and I didn't want to impose my negative energy on anyone else. And my answer is always, first of all, that's the time when instead of turning away from the divine source and your spiritual family, you need to cling to it ever more powerfully. And so we have to be ready to bring to our spiritual family not only our best face, but also our worst face, even the one that's just can hardly keep itself afloat, because part of what happens to us when we face very difficult times is the negativity infects our judgment. And it's the negativity itself that tells us, you shouldn't be around your family right now, your spiritual family right now. Because, of course, the negativity knows that the spiritual family will drive out that darkness. So, among other reasons why it's deeply important to develop spiritual habits is that when difficult times come, you want the habit simply to be there. When I was early on in the Ananda community, in the very early years, there were just a few of us, really. Like 50 or something like that. And when there was a spiritual event, if you didn't go, your absence was noted, and there was a significant drop in the energy if people didn't attend. It wasn't like 350 could not be there. It was like everybody had to be there. And we didn't have any other life. So if you didn't show up, your absence was noted also, and somebody would come to see if you were dying in your trailer and just hadn't been able to notify anyone. But as a consequence, the habit of taking myself to Sunday service and taking myself to the satsangs just became so ingrained in me, it never crossed my mind not to do it. And even when it would in 50 years, even when on a rare occasion it would occur to me that maybe today, for whatever reason it might be, it would be okay not to attend Sunday service. It's a very strange idea for me because the habit is really strong. And I mean, that's not the habit of private meditation, but that's in the habit of satsang, which is also vitally important. So here we are in the life of Jesus. First they're sent to give birth in a cave, then they have to flee in the night to get away from a murderous king, which of course again they're moving farther and farther away from their people, from their family, from their home. With the Essene community, if all of that is true, they were not going to places where there was no support for them. But nonetheless, they were moving farther and farther away from their home. And then Herod comes through. And Herod just comes through and he just viciously and murderously, kills all these babies. And out of all this tapasya, all this blood being shed, all this blood is being shed because the Messiah has come. So we think the Messiah has come. And the first thing that's going to happen is that we'll all be uplifted in joy. But the first thing that happens is that Rachel weeps and will not be consoled because her babe is no more. And again, there's symbols in this. We imagine that we get to have God and everything else that our worldly hearts desire. But even from the beginning of Christ's life, it was put forward to us very differently. So keeping all these thoughts in mind while we hear Swamiji sing a most appropriate chant, and as you wish, look at some of these artistic pictures of the slaughter of the innocents.
Lord, when in darkness, Lord, in confusion, always I'll follow Thee. Lord, when in darkness, Lord, in confusion, always I'll follow Thee. If I grieve or lose my way, only Thou canst comfort me. If I grieve or lose my way, only Thou canst comfort me. All I live for is to love Thee, my beloved friend. All I live for is to love Thee, my beloved friend. Lord, when in darkness, Lord, in confusion, always I'll follow Thee. Lord, when in darkness, Lord, in confusion, always I'll follow Thee. If I grieve or lose my way, only Thou canst comfort me. If I grieve or lose my way, only Thou canst comfort me. All I live for is to love Thee, my beloved friend. All I live for is to love Thee, my beloved friend. Lord, when in darkness, Lord, in confusion, always I'll follow Thee. Lord, when in darkness, Lord, in confusion, always I'll follow Thee. If I grieve or lose my way, only Thou canst comfort me. If I grieve or lose my way, only Thou canst comfort me. All I live for is to love Thee, my beloved friend. All I live for is to love Thee,
So all of this takes place while Joseph and Mary and Jesus are living in Egypt. And it was a few years that they had to stay away in Egypt. And then finally, word comes to Joseph, and this is how the Bible puts it. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel. For those who were trying to take the child's life are dead." So he got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. And the child grew and became strong. He was filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was on him. Now, the way this is told in the more esoteric sources is, again, they're in the Essene community. And Jesus is, from the beginning, a fully realized master. When you read Autobiography of a Yogi, and Master tells the story of his childhood and the passion of his devotion and his deep relationship with his mother in the way she taught him to worship and the way she worshipped with him and inspired him. And also you hear the stories of Master going around and visiting all these saints. Swamiji says that Master presented himself so humbly, but to Swamiji and others, Master said the truth was that when Master would go to these disciples, to these saints, they would end up wanting to learn from him, because even though he was just a boy, there was the wisdom was already upon him. So the story is told that Jesus was being trained by the Essenes and being brought up in a spiritual way, but he also, from a young age, just manifested complete power and complete understanding of everything that he was supposed to be learning. And in, let's see exactly, let me just think about how to put this together. Well, I'll read this story first. And this is the story about how Jesus, this is in the traditional Bible, this is the last story that's told of Jesus at the age of 12 until he reappears at the age of 30. But what we're going to talk about tonight is those so-called lost years. So in this we read, every year Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom. After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." Jesus answered, "Why were you searching for me? Don't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. That's how the Bible puts it. Now, in the Casey reading, so now Jesus is 12 years old, and that's the last we hear about him. And now this is from other esoteric sources. And I could connect you. There's a Original Christianity and Original Yoga is a website. It's OCOY is what it's called. And it's put together by a man named Abbot George, who's an American man who's a contemporary of Swamiji's. And he was a disciple, or is a disciple, of Anandamoy Ma. He was called Swami Nirmalananda for a while, and then he assumed this Christian identity. I'll explain a few more details about that. He's a very deeply spiritual person. He's a little bit, broad in his interpretations of things, but he has a right to do that. He's an honorable man in this. So he writes, and this is exactly what Master said. At the age of 13 was the age in which a Jewish boy would be betrothed and would have a marriage arranged and even be married at a young age. And and I'm just going to combine a lot of sources, but this is how the story is told. And this conforms with what Master was saying. That Jesus' own family was humble, but he was known throughout the land because he was such an extraordinary child. All the miracles of his birth were known. And he was also such a noble, refined, and wise soul that the way Abbot George describes it, their humble home was filled with very wealthy and notable people who all wanted to have Jesus as their son-in-law. They wanted to arrange a marriage, if it was appropriate, with their daughter. Now, Master said that Jesus saw what was happening and left home, that he didn't want to have anything to do with it. And he just went out and got on the Silk Road and joined the traders and went to India. Now, the way Casey describes it, which is just fun, it's just different, is that Jesus was beyond all his teachers, and that the Essene community itself realized that they could not train this man more than they were doing. They were just unable to do it, and that they arranged for him to go to where the Magi had come from. After all these years, who knows? But in one way or another, the wedding was being arranged. And now you think about when Master came, and if we're going to go with Swami's inclination to believe that Jesus and Master were the same, and stories are, karma repeats itself. 3 times in Master's life they tried to arrange a marriage for him. And his mother was there arranging the marriage, even though his mother was... No, that wouldn't be true, of course, because his mother had already passed. But his family was doing it, let's say that. And they wanted him to marry. And these are the government and your relatives. Everybody put something on you. And 3 times, Master absolutely refused to be part of it. So he just says, Jesus just left because the family was arranging a marriage. He didn't want any part of it. So he went back to India to revisit and sit at the feet of the great masters who had come to see him when he was a child. Now there's one beautiful painting of Jesus at the age of 12. It happens to be done by the same artist, Heinrich Hoffmann, whom the painting of Master that is on most of the Ananda altars. In Palo Alto, the painting is from the Shroud of Turin, but most of the altars have a Hoffmann painting, and this is by the same artist. And it's a beautiful picture of the radiance of Jesus when he was quite young. And so for us to sort of feel what his spirit was like when he left his home and set out on his journey to India to meet his gurus and to enter into his period of sadhana, and I'll speak about that in a moment. But first, let's enjoy this beautiful picture with, again, Swami chanting for us.
Lord, I am thine, I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. I am thine, I am thine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I thine, I am thine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. I am thine, I am thine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. I am thine, I am thine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. I am thine, I am thine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. I am thine, I am thine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. I am thine, I am thine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine, I am thine. Lord, I am thine, I am thine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. I am thine, I am thine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. Be thou mine, oh, be thou mine. I am thine, I am thine. I am thine, I am thine.
So the Bible, here's what the Bible says. After his parents found him in Jerusalem, the Bible says, then he went down to Nazareth with them, his parents, and was obedient to them. I wonder who put that line in. He's just said to his parents at the temple, why are you even searching for me? He went up to Jerusalem with his parents. They went off. He didn't bother to tell them that he wasn't going with them. He just stayed in the temple. And he left it to them to figure out that he wasn't there. Then they come back and they say, what did you do? Why did you do this? Here he answers, why are you upset? Why are you looking for me? Do you think I'm actually your child? Of course, I'm here to serve my Father, my Heavenly Father, not you. And then the Bible says he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. I never really noticed that phrase before, but Master says he snuck away to get away from their plans to marry him. You have to be careful well, I don't want to get to this, but the saints are the one who have the right to speak about other saints. But his mother, it says here, but his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And then it says, Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. And that's all that the Bible says about 18 years of his life. Before we're finished with all that I'm going to share with you, and I might not have time to do it all tonight, we'll kind of try to get a different perspective on it. Now, there's a few things that are actually like really interesting, which is that it's becoming more commonly known that Jesus went to India. When you just sort of explore even more or less conventional places, it's like the thought is growing in people's minds that something happened, that that those lost years, it just doesn't make any sense. But it's more like consciousness is changing, so the possibility of a more expanded view of these things is beginning to come forward. Master also made the interesting statement that Jesus was Oriental because he had this destiny to unite East and West. Now, I mean, the destiny, if he had a destiny to unite East and West, it was not obvious at the time of his life. We're now talking 20 centuries, 2,000 years later, the movement of energy of Master coming back, where you have Babaji and Jesus working together to solve the problems of the world, and Master talking about, East and West were forced to specialize, how he put it, during the Kali Yuga period, when the consciousness of mankind as a whole on planet Earth was not able to hold spiritual and material realities at the same time. And that society itself was so dense, so gross, that if you were serious spiritually, you just had to separate yourself from it completely. And that the nuns were cloistered, the desert fathers were way out in the forests. Even at the time of St. Francis, which was, we were coming up the other side, but we had not escaped Kali Yuga, he had to repudiate everything about his father's life and the wealth of his father's life and live in a most, intense and austere manner in order to be able to be completely focused on the divine. When we're moving up into a higher age, all of that kind of immense separation seems to be dissolving of its own accord. These monasteries, which have been going for hundreds of years, and it's a very difficult problem for these monastic orders, because they're built on the idea that there's always a younger generation coming in. But now there's not a younger generation coming in. So you have convents where you have a few old nuns and maybe one or two young novices, but it's not, the whole pattern of life is very difficult. In Palo Alto, one of the reasons we were able to purchase the building that is now our temple, which was built as a Catholic church in the late 1940s, I think, is because there were 8 parishes in the small city, or 7 or 8 in the small city of Palo Alto, and they've combined them. And the reason we were told by people on the inside is because they don't have enough priests. Because the seminaries, it's the same problem. People are not wanting that separated kind of life. But at the time of Jesus' life, everything was very separated. But he was, he was in the Mideast as it was, and then went all the way over to meet his Indian gurus in the country of India. And he was 18 years in India. His early life, he was 4 or 5 years in Egypt. Then he went back to his people in Israel. But by the age of 13, he was gone. He was in India. Now, in the year, let me see what year it was. It was like the late 1800s. I have to sort of find, here it is. There, in 1887 is the time. There was a Russian named Nicholas Notovich. And he went to India, and he was exploring in India. There was a lot of interchange between Russia and India. And he had heard these rumors that there was evidence that Jesus had been to India. This is where it begins. It begins with Notovich. He'd heard these rumors that Jesus had been to India, and that there were certain ancient manuscripts that were describing the life that was clearly the life of Jesus. They called him Saint Isa, is what he was called. Isa means Lord, is what it means. And there was a particular monastery called the Hinduism monastery, which I'll show you just pictures of what it looks like now, up in Ladakh, which is a very remote area of India. And Nodovich made his way, and travel, of course, was not simple in that time, made his way to that monastery. He talked to the Lama. He inquired of the Lama. He really wanted to know about this manuscript. The Lama acknowledged that they had, in fact, a copy of the manuscript, and everything that was described in there described this very advanced soul, Isa, and what he did when he was in India, and then the story of what he did when he left again, and what his fate was after he went back to his own people, and what he was going back to. It was like this. So Nodovich wanted to be able to see this manuscript, but the Lama said, "No, I don't think you can see it. The next time you come, you'll be able to see it. Or maybe when you come back," or something like that. But it was the next time. Nodovich is a tremendous effort to get up to this remote monastery, and he's more than a little frustrated. Then the story is also told that, let's see, the government, here comes the government again, that I think it was the British government by this point, yes, it was the British government were suspicious of Russians. And so this movement came, and Nodovich was going to have to leave the country. He was going to have to go away. So he starts, on his way out from the monastery without having accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. The mule that he was riding has an accident. He falls, he breaks his leg very badly, and he simply can't continue the journey. So they have to carry him back to the monastery. So now he's come back to the monastery for his second visit. And the Lama says, "Okay, we'll show you the manuscript." So the manuscript was apparently, this is how it said, it's written in Tibetan, but it had been translated from a much more ancient language. And he published the book. It's called The Unknown Christ. And it's just basically the story, which is also available on this website that I'm talking to you about. And it's when Nodovich published this manuscript declaring this whole story about Jesus having been in India, as you can imagine, there was an enormous outcry against it. And many people tried to discredit, and they didn't have an internet, but they had lots of alternate theories of what might be true. So there are some people, and there are some reports that you can read, totally discrediting Nodovich and saying it was a complete, sham, and it never happened. So later on, like about in the early 1920s, two Ramakrishna disciples, who were founders of the Vedanta Society, they traveled. They also went to that monastery, and the first one, especially, who went was Swami Abhedananda. And the Lama showed him the manuscript. And again, they had translators, and he himself knew some of the language. And it was exactly what Nodovich had translated and published was exactly what was there. Then later, Swami Trigunatit Ananda, he also came and he checked it. And then on this website, they list all the other travelers that came and the Buddhist scholar. And everybody confirmed that Nodovich had been really correct. And so what they describe is these 18 years that Jesus was in India, and Jesus became Isa. He became known all over the land. He was, in that land of India, a greatly respected spiritual teacher. And there's no specific story about sadhana, about who he was with and what he did. So we have to go on what Master said, which is simply that he went to return the visit. And if Babaji would have, been in the Himalayas there, if Babaji was one of the magi who came to see him, if Jesus was indeed Master and the deepest relationship with Babaji, well, I don't know. So we're going to just look at some pictures now, just to sort of give us a feeling. Now, of course, 2,000 years have passed. Some things change in 2,000 years, but some things don't. So I just wanted to put up a few pictures of the Himalayas. And We can just look at this picture. I'm sure this is, I don't know if it's Everest or what it is, but it's a picture of the Himalayas. I had the opportunity, when we went to India for the first time, which was in 1986, during the first few trips that we took to India, we went up to Nepal, and we were able to do this thing, this tourist flight, where you get on a flight and you simply fly over the high Himalayas. And it's like a half an hour, 45 minutes flight where you can just look out the window and see. I read a wonderful essay by, it was a Ramakrishna Swami. And he said that the greatness of India is because of the Himalayas, because the power and remoteness of those mountains. We can shift to another mountain just so we can enjoy it. The power and the remoteness of those mountains always hold this image. Mountains remote and still, Swami wrote in his thing, hint of higher worlds unseen. So may our lives be soaring and serene. Another time that I saw the Himalaya mountains was, at this time we went to Darjeeling. We stopped going to Nepal. We just started going to Darjeeling, where you could view the Himalayas, but you could be sitting comfortably in a little coffee shop somewhere and look out and see the mountains. And the first time I was there, the vivid contrast between the fact that I was sitting on the deck of the patio of a nice little hotel, having a cup of coffee or whatever I was doing, and simultaneously I could see those mountains and had in my mind that, Babaji was there and who knows what other great saints were living their lives up in those mountains, and the contrast between the comfort and the smallness of where I was and the magnitude of those mountains had the effect on my mind exactly of what that Swami had, that we mustn't aim too low, and we mustn't hold ourselves to too small a possibility. So let's look at the next mountain. Now, sometimes mountain climbers, some of the mountain climbers who write of their adventures, Westerners, who go up into those mountains, with all the latest equipment and the oxygen tanks. There are numerous stories of encountering yogis at heights where they can't see how a human being can live, but that there's yogis moving around on those heights. Now, I don't think for the most part that's always where yogis live, but how would I know? But the fact that the mountaineers every so often have to come back and say we met one is really extraordinary. Now, we have to think, now Jesus is coming, he's 14 years old by the time he reaches India, but he's obviously, he's a God-realized soul, and he's coming back to his masters. He knows exactly where he's coming to, and in some part of his journey he must have at least gotten close to these Himalayan mountains. So the next picture is a picture of caves in the mountain. Now, of course, these are all modern pictures, but one could even imagine, that 2,000 years ago people were building buildings, but a picture like this of how yogis can establish themselves, or monks can establish themselves, in the foothills and in the mountains. It's really, I always find it just marvelous to think about just going inside one of those little places and staying there for a long time. I've only meditated in a cave once or a little bit, but you see, once you go inside a cave, the silence and the sound of the Om it's a whole different reality. So let's take another click. This is actually Babaji's cave, the one that's referred to in autobiography of a yogi where Babaji is often known to be. Now, of course, this is modern, and they've put a front on it, they've put a gate on it. There is, I believe, an SRF monastery not too far away, and they sort of keep control over it. The gate is to keep the animals out, and so on. But this is not in those kind of inaccessible, snowy reaches. This is something that you can walk to and meditate inside. The cave is just the size of a small room It's not really immense inside. But perhaps Jesus met Babaji at that cave, for all we know. And if it wasn't at this cave, it was probably a cave something like it. So the next picture, this is actually a picture, and this is near a very famous cave and ashram called Vasishtha Guha, which is above Rishikesh. It's about 40 minutes above Rishikesh. This cave is probably fronting on the Ganges, but I didn't see anything that showed me that it was, because these cliffs, which are right near Vasishtha Guha, is right on the Ganges. Vasishtha is a very famous sage, and it was his cave from ancient times. And then Swami Purushottamananda, who was also a Ramakrishna Swami, lived there for many years. And the Vasishtha cave continues. It's very accessible, and it's very powerful. And I've been there multiple times. And then you walk down from the cave to the riverbank, and there's cliffs like this. Swami Kriyananda took a month's seclusion in the cave that looks very much like this one. I don't think it was this one. It doesn't look enough like it to be this one. But this is said to be the cave that Jesus himself spent a lot of time meditating in this cave. Remarkable to think about. It's a tradition. It could be true. There have been subsequent times when others have meditated there, where they have felt the presence of Jesus and have seen him in vision. There are consistent reports of people seeing Jesus in present time in vision when he lived in that cave. So now we're going to go up to Ladakh. And Ladakh is where, this is the Hemis monastery. And I doubt if 2,000 years ago it looked like that, but you have no idea. We have no idea. It's very remote. It's very, very old. So let's go on show the next picture of the monastery. This is inside the monastery courtyard, and you can see the high mountains and the rocky. There's other pictures where all those mountains are covered with snow. It's a very remote place. Even now, it's a very remote place. So it's not said that Jesus came here. This is where Notovich came and found the manuscript. And so let's just go, there's one more picture of the monastery. No, that's the last picture of the monastery. Yes, you're right. Okay. So let's come back, right. Okay, so Jesus goes up into this area of India. And you see, one of the things that's really lacking, because these 18 years were removed from the life of Christ, we have this very strange situation where Jesus has no sadhana. And let me just think about this for a minute. No, I think I'll speak about it a little bit in a few minutes to sort of explain how sort of all of this works. But the whole Christian theology just has Jesus as this completely independent entity, and even John the Baptist, who Master describes as Jesus' guru, because John the Baptist himself defers to Jesus, and even though Jesus tells them that Elijah was born as John the Baptist, still we have Jesus, he floats by himself. And the whole theology is built around the fact that he just is an entirely independent entity, which makes Jesus glorious in his spiritual magnitude, but it also makes him completely inexplicable. And therefore, all we can do is ask for his grace and try to live as he lived, but we don't have a clear understanding of how you become a Christ or what a Christ is. And because Jesus never had a sadhana, apparently, in traditional theology, never had a guru, never had to learn. And in fact, one of the reasons why all of this was taken out of the Bible is that they didn't want Jesus to have to learn, because it didn't match the theology that they had developed at that point, that there would be anyone who could teach him. Because if he was the pure Son of God, just created out of the substance of God, and the only Son of God, then how could there be a teacher? How could there be a guru for him? But in fact, he goes to India. He spends like 6 years in the Himalayas, and he spends 6 years in the city of Varanasi, and he spends about 6 years at the Jagannath temple. So, bearing in mind that the Indian culture is the only continuous culture on the planet today, that it goes back thousands of years. No one knows how far back it goes. As Swamiji put it, they find ancient statues of people meditating, or murtis that are the same murtis, or people doing yoga postures, or various things that are recognizably exactly the same as they are now. And they can date those back 4,000 or 5,000 years, but nobody knows how old it was at that time. And the culture of India has always been the same. It's been invaded, it's been dominated at different times, but the indigenous culture of India has always been Sanatana Dharma. It's not Hinduism, it's Sanatana Dharma. It's just a perception of the spiritual nature of life, and various ways of living that, and different masters who come, and different avatars who come for a period of time, but they're all threads from that same truth. It's not like each master brings a different truth. It's they have a way of describing it. It's all Sanatana Dharma, and then each of these lineages come down. So the fact of Jesus appearing, even though he came from a different culture and arrived on that scene, he was just teaching Sanatana Dharma, because that's what he taught. That's what Master's mission now is, to show how the teachings of Jesus and the original teachings of Jesus and the original teachings of Krishna are the same teaching. In fact, it's an amusing thing that when the Christian missionaries went to India and heard about the teachings of Krishna, which predate the teachings of Jesus, and there was a lot of similarity between what Krishna taught and what Jesus taught, they had to say that Krishna must have been born later. He must have copied Jesus, because it was unthinkable to them that Jesus could have been influenced by Krishna. But all of this is old Kali Yuga thinking, and see what's happening now is this is perfectly comprehensible to all of us, and all of these facts of what that world was like, and that people could travel from place to place, and things that Edgar Cayce said, and now things that Master said. People are just accepting it. A famous scientist said, it's not that new scientific theories are proven true and accepted. He said that a new generation of scientists grows up with them, and the old generation dies off. He was being a little bit cynical about the objective scientific process. But we watch it now, watching children grow up with technology, and it's just natural to them. I grew up with running water and electricity, but my great-grandparents didn't have running water and electricity. And when it all first started, it was so exciting to them. But to me, running water and electricity are normal. To little children now, to be able to tell Alexa what you want is just perfectly natural. They just don't even think of it as odd. There's this thing that can turn on the lights and turn off the lights and play the music, and in a consciousness way, we're growing up with the idea that there's no reason why the teachings of Jesus can't be integrated to the teachings of India. Why not? And the idea that he might go to India and have studied there, because we've all been to India. I mean, it's all like we can do all these things now. We know what that looks like. And we go into other cultures and realize how many values are the same. So the idea of it is, it's like it's perfectly comprehensible to us. We see people who look different than us. We see races and cultures and languages blending all the time. So we imagine a world in which that could happen. Whereas in the depths of Kali Yuga, after Jesus died, I mean, the nadir of Kali Yuga was 500 years after Jesus died. So for 500 years after his life, it just got worse. It didn't get better, it just got worse and worse, just going down and down. But now we're out of that. So we're sort of at a point where we can accept these realities. So the city of Varanasi, which anciently was called also the city of Kashi, it's dedicated to Lord Shiva. is said to be the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. And it's always been a holy city. And it was there in the city of Varanasi that the best scholars of the ancient Indian texts, and just it was considered then, I mean, it was the center of spiritual learning. So it said, according to the manuscript that Notovich found up in the Hemis monastery, Jesus spent time in the high mountains, and then he was sent, is how they put it, to study in Varanasi. So I have a few pictures of Varanasi just to give you a feeling of what that place was like. And of course, again, we're talking many years ago, but when you look at Varanasi, you really have no idea how old it could be. And of course, the Ganges is there. The holy Ganges flows through it. Yeah, let's go ahead. Okay. So this is a probably slightly colorized picture, but you can see this is the Ganges River at dawn. The city of Varanasi is built on one side of the Ganges. The other side of the Ganges is considered to be unsuitable for habitation, so it's always built on this one side. They may also flood. There are various reasons. Some of them are mythical and some of them are practical. But the city of Varanasi this is old Varanasi. There's also, of course, modern times. Let's go to the next picture. Now, this is a place that I have visited multiple times. As Indian cities go, now I haven't been there in at least 15 years, and I think it's changed radically since the last time I was there. But it was not a particularly clean city, and it was in the old part of the city. Apparently it's all much more. It's advanced a great deal. When I saw it in 1986, that was a long time ago. There were many conditions in that city that, given my temperament, I should not have enjoyed. But there was so much spiritual energy in that city, especially, of course, when you came down by the Ganges, by these ancient bathing ghats and watching the sunrise over the Ganges. It just was something else. The truth of spirituality just being in the soil and being in the air was so powerful there. So undoubtedly, at the time of Jesus, when he was there in India, it was, as it's always been, considered the holiest city in India. Bear in mind, when Master settled in Los Angeles, he called it Benares, is what the city was called at that time. Master said he's settling in Los Angeles because Los Angeles is the Benares of the West, which is quite a statement because it's considered to be, in the holy country of India, it's considered to be the holiest city in India. And Master said that Los Angeles was the equivalent in this country. Swamiji says that he feels the spiritual energy of Los Angeles beneath all that's going on there. And Master obviously did. So, you just don't quite know where to put all these things. So let's move on and see another picture here. This is just sort of fun. The little temple that you see, the closest temple that you can see, it's half submerged in the Ganges, and depending on what state the river is in, sometimes the water comes way up and just submerges that little temple, and then when the water goes away, then they clean out all the silt and the mud, and then they carry on in whatever way they carry on. Who knows how long these things have been sitting here. They're just so, ancient is the only word you can think of. I don't know if physical structures like that could have been there at the time of Christ, but if they weren't, something like them was. Let's move on to see one of the ghats. The whole city, at this point, it's all these steps that lead down to the river. They're called the ghats, and different ghats have different vibrations and histories and stories of saints. Dasasamit Ghat, which actually I believe this is Dasasamit. It doesn't look like what I'm used to seeing, but that's where Babaji lives. That's where Mataji lives under a stone in the autobiography of a yogi. When now I forget, was it Ram Gopal? Ram Gopal Muzumdar gets called down there to witness Lahiri Mahashaya, Babaji, and Mataji having a conversation, and Mataji persuading her brother Babaji to keep his body. Mataji lives under a paving stone, and the paving stone magically rises. And yeah, we went there, we sat there, we bathed there, we chanted there. You just don't really know quite where you are. Let's take the next. This just gives you, again, a picture of sort of what it looks like there. Bear in mind, the level of the river can be way up those stairs. It just depends on what season it is. And you can see these old palaces. Oftentimes ruling families in India would have a palace on the Ganges in Varanasi. It was considered very auspicious to die in Varanasi because Lord Shiva was there, and in theory you could be liberated because Shiva would liberate you because it was his city. So people would build these palaces where they could retire. And even still, to this day, Indians will retire to the city of Varanasi. So you can imagine, in whatever form, Jesus walking along the Ganges, because the Ganges was the same. Whatever was built or not built around him, he was still on that ground, by that river, with the sadhus and the saints and the pundits, immersing himself in this culture. This was Jesus' culture, 18 years. This was the life he lived. Let's see the next picture, which is just, again, you can see these pictures. Just somewhere up in there is the Trilanga Swami's ashram. Let's see the next one. This is the people in the morning coming down to bathe. Let's go to the next picture. I'm going to finish the pictures, then I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about being in Varanasi, and that's as far as we're going to get tonight. Let's see. Anandamoyi Ma has an ashram. I guess it would be downriver, upriver. Anyway, I can never know. But a little farther away from the most populated areas. This isn't her ashram, but she has an ashram that's at the level of where that tower is. And there's a patio that you can sit there in. This is what the scene looks like very much around her ashram. Now let's go to the other end of the day, which is the sun going down. And sunrise and sunset are times of particular worship. Let's go to the next. This is modern, but they have arities and worship services. You put little boats with candles on them into the water, and all of the rituals are carried out. And then the next picture we're going to look at, this is actually a picture at night of the cremation ground. And this is what I wanted to just tell a few stories about, just sort of the way the Indian life is even now in relation to life and death. This is just right on the Ganges. And you can, if you're on a boat, you're just looking at it. If you're coming from the city side, you can just walk, and each of those fires is where a body is being burned, and their family is there. The men, maybe now the women go, but usually it was just the men. They go and see that the body is burned, and then gather up the ashes and then ceremonially put them into the Ganges. Why don't we, that'll be the end of the pictures, and let me just say a little bit more about Varanasi. I'm not going to get any farther tonight. I was going to get all the way to the Jagannath temple, but I don't think so. I'll wait till tomorrow. I just wanted to talk a little about Varanasi to just give you a feeling, because that's where Jesus was for such a long time. I went to Varanasi for the first time it probably was September of 1986, and I went back there. Well, we went to India about 12 or 13 times on those pilgrimages, and of course we went every time. The first time was the most spectacular because we'd never been there before. And the day we were there, it was a full moon. The day we arrived, it was a full moon, and it was an eclipse of the full moon. I don't know if it was a partial eclipse or a full eclipse, but it doesn't matter, because it was a tremendously auspicious time to bathe in the Ganges. So we were able to go out on a boat. We were able to go out on a boat at night onto the Ganges, and our group of 30-ish, or I don't know how many we were. We came down. We got into our little boats, and we just sort of went slowly along the bank, sitting in the boats and looking toward the bank. And the night pictures that you saw of just the lights and so on is what we were looking at. And there were hundreds, thousands of people on the shores waiting for the auspicious moment when the eclipse was going to come onto the moon so that they could all go into the water at that time. So there we are on the river Ganges. There we're watching this happening. We go down to where the cremation grounds are, and the guide that's with us points to the fires and explains the whole process of the logs and all the wood that's there and how much wood it takes and the body being set. Later, when in daytime, we often saw family members carrying a stretcher with a dead person on it, wrapped usually in white, covered with flowers. The family members would just carry the body to the cremation grounds and make arrangements with the officials there. They would set the body on the logs, and then usually the oldest son, if there was, or some appropriate male relative, would set the pyre on fire, and then the family would just stand and watch until the relative was consumed. There were other ritual things involved, but that was the basic. Coming from the West, where all of this is absolutely hidden away, and the idea that you would actually set your mother on fire after her body was emptied of her soul just was so unthinkable. But to be in an atmosphere where just life and death were just roiling around us with so much reality is actually the word. Where you realized how sanitized our life is in the West, and how distant we are from the fundamental realities. It was extremely poignant. And apparently Divine Mother decided that we really needed to get the point. So when we finally came back to the Ghat and we started walking up the stairs, another family group comes down the stairs, and there is a man, not a very old man, but an adult man. He's carrying a small bundle in his hands, and we realized it was the dead body of his own child. And he was going down, and after we realized what was happening, we just turned and watched. All of this just happens. He just gets in a boat, and our guide explained to us that children under 5 are not cremated. They're weighted with stones and put into the Ganges. I don't know why. But so we watch him get in a boat. We watch him go out into the center of the river, and he consigns the body of his own child, and he gives it to Mother Ganga. You just sort of have to start over and think that so many of the things that we just assume, why do we assume that this is the way things are done? We've had so many lives, and there's so many different ways to think about this, and so many beautiful ways for us to live. So why don't we end our evening by listening to Swami sing Through Many Lives. We can use the regular picture of Jesus, because I haven't really introduced the other one. Well, no, let's do this one. Here's the picture that I'm going to show you of Jesus that we'll post while we listen to Swami sing, is actually a copy or an artist's rendition of a picture that Trigunatitananda saw at the Hemis Monastery. That was supposed to be a picture of Asha when he was in India. So let's listen to Swami sing Through Many Lives, and let this picture of Saint Asha inspire us, and that'll be the end of our evening.
many lives I've drunk the cup of laughter. No man could tell the pleasures I have known. The stars in the endless sky, if one could count, would come to billions. Yet as vast as are their numbers, so many years I've wandered far from you. Yet as vast as are their numbers, so many years I've wandered far from you. Through many lives I've drunk the cup of sorrow. No man could tell the bitter tears I've shed. The drops in the endless sea, if one could count, would come to billions. Yet as vast as are their numbers, so many years I've wandered far from you. Yet as vast as are their numbers, so many years I've wandered far from you. Through countless lives I've sought your cup of sweetness, found other cups, yet thirsted evermore. The streams in the hills of time all found their way into a desert. Every noon of bright fulfillment, ere many hours did sink to evening gloom. Every noon of bright fulfillment, ere many hours did sink to evening gloom. I long for you in summer and in winter, only for you my heart thirsts day and night. I've learned that the sweetest songs ears ever heard were but your echo. Lord, at last fill me completely, for nevermore I'd wander far from you. Lord, at last fill me completely, for nevermore I'd wander far